Okay, so let's start. So today, we'll have one more meetup of test automation camp. So we will follow the same format as last time for the one who were there. Elsa will explain. So we'll have the first part, which is on the presentation, which I will make. And then we'll have a commentary, feedback, and sharing of experience part with Diogo Rede, which I'm happy that he's with us today. And then we'll have the Q&A part at the end. So again, any points or feedback you want, you just drop it on the chat during the event, and you will have the opportunity to share and talk at the end of the event if you wish to. And the topic today is to talk about starting API testing. So we'll just do a brief introduction of the speakers. So on my side, I'm the co-founder of Test Automation Camp. I'm passionate about software and quality, and especially the theme of quality engineering. So I hope also to share what I like about this topic of API and testing in the world of software and how to do it properly. And Diogo, if you want, you can also present a bit yourself, but we are also Diogo, which is
Yes, I'm Diogo Rede. I'm from Porto, Portugal, and right now I'm a solution architect and testing advocate at TestRail. This is a long title, but basically it means that I help people experience TestRail in a better way. I try to help people who have doubts. I try to create documentation, etc. There's a whole bunch of stuff that needs to be done to improve the experience of people. I just started last year, and previously I've been I like to call myself an agile tester for the last 10 years. So I've done a little bit of everything from web testing, mobile testing, so more into the UI, and then also a lot of APIs, which is what we are going to talk about here today. Mm-hmm. And I do some talks sometimes as well.
Thanks a lot, Diogo. Yeah. So in fact, today we will share on the big picture until the detail, and if you want to, we can have some more concrete part at the end. So I also like to start always by the big picture on API, and I think when we heard about API, we can hear about a lot of words that you see on these famous cloud words. So it can be very quickly messy. And today the objective is also to get visibility into this complex topic and to have a step-by-step way to start your API testing. So we'll go through the three main parts. So first one, to understand the API bit. Then we will see how API and testing are connected together, and then to pivot on how to implement and address the test of APIs. So starting by introducing API, for me it's also always important to go back to the why of things, to understand why things are created and where they come from in terms of technology perspective. So we need to think about API are not only for the beauty of doing interesting stuff with technical things like REST API, SOAP APIs, or the type of technology buzzword we will be sharing after, is at the heart of enabling and easing the collaboration of businesses through automated and through software. And in fact, APIs can take various forms. So today, when we say API, we directly think it's about synchronous API, REST, SOAP, etc. But file sharing between companies is a form of API because it's a way to share information. So API are a specific type because they are more synchronous, etc. We'll see afterward. But so key points is API are there to ease and facilitate the collaboration of entities. It can be companies, it can be application within your information system, but they are the heart of connectivity. Sorry. And then what I was sharing is that API, as we know them as synchronous API, the major advantage here is that they bring the speed of collaboration, so between entities, applications, so what you are connecting. And the other advantage is that nowadays it's bringing connectivity at speed and at scale, because you are able to increase the collaboration to multiple producers, multiple consumers. So before it was a lot about building web and mobile application. Now we have a lot of things on IoT, streaming. We have developer portal to connect your API with multiple companies outside. So it's becoming really the corner piece of collaboration for companies. And it's also why you see a lot of, I would say, push on API development in the ecosystem, and why also specific requirements of API, like security, are must-have requirements because they are at the cornerstone of transactions that are generating profits for our organization. So this is why it's very important to secure that part. So, and if we go to what are APIs, so we could do something very complex, technically, etc. But to understand what it is and to make it a usage for testing, in fact, API, so what it stands for, it's Application Programming Interface. And we need to think it simply as a request response mechanism between a caller and the application that is responding. And normally you have behind the scene a web server, database, and application that is running through. And this is important to have in mind this part because API testing is one of the layers to test of things that are running behind the scenes that you can also test in different ways. One particular point on API, I was saying a lot of API are synchronous, etc. In fact, you can have some APIs that take the form of webhooks that are not really synchronous at some point because you have some part of the API that is coming from asynchronous hooks, etc. So it can be a bit more complex than that. So yes, majority of API are synchronous, part of them are asynchronous. And even if in some cases you say, yes, I have one API, I have 10,000 consumers in it, etc., you always have one-to-one connectivity that is initiated between the caller and the application. So also an important point to keep in mind when it comes to testing the API afterwards. So if we look a bit at the market in terms of API, you may have heard about this buzzword on top, so SOAP, REST, GraphQL, etc. So today, the one most popular and most used and deployed are REST. We will see why. But we have an increase also of the gRPC part is increasing a bit, especially in specific microservice deployment for high performance, etc. And if you heard about GraphQL, so GraphQL behind the scene use the same logic as REST, but it's more a representation and an access layer that is being used. And RPC and SOAP are much more about the past, in fact. So they are less used, etc. And what we will share more today is about REST because it's the main API test, main API you can face in an organization. So now if we go to join API and testing, so I was saying about the imperative of API. So today we are here to talk about starting API testing, and we need to understand first what are the goals of testing API. So I really put for me two major goals on top. Is to one, identify proactively issues before you release an API. And the more the API is connected to other applications, to external consumer and generating business, the more risk you are facing. So imagine if you have to test an API that will be shipped into a car. Well, you have to be very, I would say proactive in this first part to ensure that when it's live, you have a few issues because you can still correct it, but you can create a major disaster. And then on the second point, is more on the continuous part, is on the operation of the API, is to ensure its reliability, security, etc. So more from a usage point of view, and part of that, you can only test it once it's live. You cannot test everything in a testing environment, etc. Even if you can reduce the risk, you cannot really simulate the target production workload. And requirements are of many types, so we also provide a step-by-step order there at the end of the meetup, but you have a first part, which is validate the functional requirement because your API is there not to do technical things, it's to provide specific functions. So you need to know what are the specific functions and how to test them. You have also to ensure that the results provided by the API are accurate because as we saw, API are there for the interconnectivity of systems. So if the data return are wrong, you can generate a lot of cascading issues on the other side because people consuming the API will also base a lot of business behavior based on your API result. So you have a huge responsibility to validate the result accuracy of the API. You have also the integration part, which is quite important because we see that REST have many technologies. We didn't talk about authentication, retry, security mechanism, etc. But integration of API can be quite complex in distributed environment, various environment, etc. So there is a specific part to address on API in that part. Similarly to other type of testing, you have to ensure the robustness under edge case on strange input data and to secure that the data entered is safe if you have some type of attack. You have also to cope much more on API with a peak of traffic and potential scalability because the response time are very fast, etc. But you also have scalability issue to deal with. Security, as we shared, is much more important right now on APIs than it was in the past because API are much more deployed for the collaboration of entities and a lot in cloud environment. So it means that you have stuff sometimes going a lot through internet, etc. So you have to secure a lot of that part. And also to ensure better interconnectivity. So testing API, it's not necessarily only about doing testing. It can be to ensure the quality of the API. You have also a job of industry standard review and best practice in terms of how it has been implemented as an API. So, and the API testing, so before I shared there was two buckets, so proactive testing and continuous testing of API. So one point to share, it was you have to do as much as possible proactive testing of API to reduce what we see on the left, which is the cost of defects. So and here it's valid for any type of test, but your job when you test API, in fact, is to be as much as possible on the left part. And you see that, yes, you have to test on integration, component testing. So, and I think it's what everyone have in mind when we say we will test API. It's we wait something to be ready and then we start to test. But in fact, much of the effort should be put also on the first two stages we are seeing here. So requirement and architecture part, because I was saying, okay, you need to test the integration, but if you want to ensure a proper integration, big part of the work should be done by design. And Diogo was sharing that his job is to help customers do proper integrations of the TestRail solution. But I assume a lot of good integration works well if a good job is done in the requirement and architecture part. And in the API testing, and API is the same. If you ensure the most at the beginning, it can be much more faster afterward. And you can also do specific testing. We will talk a bit about contract testing, which is a specific type of API test. And it's a specific type of test you can do to quickly test the API early in the coding phases instead of waiting to be in the later stages. And the other advantage, when you are starting the coding part, it's to combine it with the paradigm of DevOps we see on the right, but basically to iterate with short cycle of iteration quickly with the API to avoid that the cycle we see on the left take some days or weeks. You try that it take only a few hours, a few minutes ideally to do the cycle quickly to reduce this feedback loop. So, and to situate the API testing into the global perimeter of tests. So on the left part, we heard a lot about API testing, sometimes as service test or integration test. So just to make the link with the testing pyramid. So I have here the Martin Fowler testing pyramid as a reference, but majority of them are like that. So also to have in mind that your API testing is not everything. So you are part of a global testing strategy. So this is why you need to really understand where your API fits. Because if your API is to be used for a lot of consumers behind the scene and you don't have user interface, you are the final guy responsible for the API testing before it ships to, in fact, your customers, because the customers are the guys connecting directly to the API, so you have much more responsibilities there. In some cases, you are, for example, developing API where the API will be directly integrated into the same application and the same team working on it. So it does not mean you have nothing to do, but it means that you have to equilibrate better the effort of testing, because you need to avoid things to be tested twice or more at different layers of the application. And it also means that you need to be conscious of the full end-to-end testing perspective. So you cannot do only the API testing part if you want to start API testing. You need to understand what are the other type of tests that are going to be done by product development and other teams to really focus on your value in terms of API tests. And API testing, as the other type of tests for web, mobile app, and other type of testing, there is various type of quality attributes to ensure with different type of testing. So integration, load test, regression, security. So we'll see after in terms of priority what you can do to prioritize that part. So a brief overview of REST APIs. So REST API are the most simpler to understand, I would say, as a concept, but they can be very hard to make them simple and beautiful in reality. So here we have a very simple example, and also to make the correlation and the comparison between XML. So understanding the concept of JSON, the objective has always been to be easy to parse, so to process, and human readable. So, because the example on the right on XML, you say, it's also readable, but this is a simple example. If you get in an enterprise, the XML of many API, it's a lot of boilerplate code, etc., with namespace and all the stuff, and it's very hard to understand as a human what's going there in terms of flow. So REST is much more lightweight in that aspect. It focuses a lot on the data, less on the document, because XML is more focused on the document part. So yes, less verbosity, much lighter and faster to process. And the structuring piece on the JSON part, REST JSON, is the key value pair, and everything is structured around the key value aspect. So it means that a lot of around your API testing will be based on that lightweight parsable content in key value pair. So that flexibility and light aspect also come with a trade-off. It means that the content return can also be much more hard to predict. So you have some open API contract, etc., that comes to help to structure, okay, the REST contract will provide this type of data, etc. But you can face cases where some API don't have a formalized contract, and this will be much harder to test. And this is why we come back to what I was saying, if you you are going to implement API tests, and a lot of cases, you will not have to test one API, you will have to test multiple API, multiple scales. If you see API without contract, first reflex you can have before implementing any test is to challenge the team to implement a proper contract. And then on the right, the REST JSON, the paradigm, is oriented around simple verbs. So that you see there, so get, post, put, and delete. And in fact, it's really around the simple resources that you are interacting. And as we see, the JSON REST paradigm is oriented around data. So as you see on the URI, you are doing a specific verb on an object or data that is there, for example, employees. But a lot of the data there is around objects, in fact, that you can interact with. So now when it comes to testing APIs, so I selected here the key steps that we have to do. And I think many people, or many teams or etc. start by the 5, which is an error in the short, mid and long term, because you will have a lot of tests that are not properly done, that the team will not necessarily use, and it will be very costly to automate, and in reality you don't have time to automate and maintain everything. So our recommendation is to start on these 5 steps and in that specific order, and we will go through them right now. So on the big picture, the first thing to understand on API, it's a bit connecting what I was sharing before, is why the API was done for your company. Is it to generate new business? Who are the end users? So you need to understand, is it internal facing application? Is it to connect multiple consumers? Is it to make money? Is it to streamline a specific collaboration process? I don't know, to buy products or things like that. And how we will measure the success of the API. And the success of the API is not only about having 99% availability of the API. It can be, it will help, but it's usually about what are the business drivers to do this API. And if you understand that, you can much more better also focus your effort of test. For example, if your API is a lot around the developer, that, for example, your target market is to integrate a lot of startups on a specific use case, you know that your success rate will be how many developers you are able to onboard, how many people interact on your portal, how many people talk about your API in forums and stuff like that. And it means, for example, you will put much more emphasis on the ease of use and integration of the API on that case, rather than, for example, if it's an API used only for internal purpose on a transactional process, where it can be a bit more simpler, I would say, in terms of packaging, documentation, etc. So very important to understand the business driver and what will be measure the success of the API. The second part is how it fits in terms of API layers. So you have variation of these layers. Normally you can have 3 or 4, but you see on the scheme in the middle, you have 3 layers of API. So the first one is experience API. Normally, these APIs don't have business logic or complex flows behind the scene to be tested. They are much more on being consumed and targeted for specific use case. So if your API, for example, is on that last layer, your focus will be much more on the usability, security, because it's much more end user facing, and the rules are much more simpler. In fact, normally what is being done, because the complexity your API is abstracting is the consumption and usage. So this is one possibility. Then you can have the second layer, which is process API. And process API, normally what they are doing, they are orchestrating specific flows and API calls in the third layer we see on bottom, and they are saving the experience part. So it means that there, for example, you may have less security concerns from an end user perspective, etc., because it will be interconnected in your systems most of the time. but the complexity you will have is on the use case and the business rules and orchestrations they will be handling there. So your focus should be much more on that data coherency, responsiveness, latency, because as you may be calling multiple systems, you need to ensure the specific response time. You may have, for example, there much more issue of scalability, because if you put a lot of loads, a lot of the API response will depend on the underlying system, so you may have more scalability issues, for example. And the last part is the system API, the last layer. Normally, these API are much more around exposing services of existing applications. So it's a lot around modernizing existing systems. So sometimes you can have an old application that does not have an API. It was only, for example, sharing things through file. You start to expose API and you start to be able to connect with the other layer. And here, the stakes will also be will be different. Normally, will be a lot around validating that the exposition of data from backend system is working properly. And you will be less concerned about the end user facing and the...
És tu.
Obrigado, pessoal.
You, George. And then on the IT integration, you will need also to understand which piece of IT are integrated with your API. So you can have domain services, what are the authorization layer, is the API connected in the back with the database or whatever. So you need to understand how the API is packaged with the rest of the IT system. And this is really the foundation to say, once I have this big picture, I can start to think about how to test this API. So the next step is then to focus on the API and to understand the fit in the big picture. The most effective way normally to understand how an API is supposed to be working is to look at the sequence diagram, because it will materialize the expected interactions with the API, external consumer that you may have to simulate, and what the API will do behind the scene with other systems. And this is where you can start to understand what are the key rules that will happen, what are the key scenario and use case that will be done, what are the error cases you may face. And this is very important to look at that and avoid to jump, for example, directly in trying to play with the API, because playing with the API is only a very partial representation of what will happen. You only have the end result, in fact. And after, what you can do is go on the right on the descriptor portal, and you can have a look at all the API verbs, all the data, all the flows, etc. And to really start here to do a bit of playing with the data and the API to see how it's working. From there, you start to say, okay, I will now start to have to prioritize my effort of testing. So now, two effective practice there is based on the flow of the API. You can already focus based on the objective of the API and the business objective of doing this API, focus on where it matters. So is it more important on the creation of, for example, the creation of an app? It's for example, maybe much more important than the creation of a custom report, because 80% of the user will use most of the time the app template because it's the main feature you will be providing. So you know that you will have to prioritize your testing effort as early as possible and on the continuous basis on that part. And then we have the part of, we see that there is multiple testing techniques to be done, and you can say, okay, normally you don't have time to do everything. You have to prioritize. One effective way you can do that is to using the agile testing quadrant for agile testing. And this will help you prioritize the typology of tests you can do to reduce the risk of the API and improve the value of the product and for the business. And then you have to deal with the technical constraint of, okay, maybe your priority will be to do security tests, for example, and you say, oh, I don't have any security tooling or practice in place, but yes, this will be the main problem to address on the main use case you will be providing. And this is very important to do it that way, because one issue we see, for example, for teams is, I have a soft UI or whatever tool, Postman, I will do the test, I know. But in fact, the test, may not provide the value we are expecting for the business and for the development team. So you really need to do that focus on what is more important for the API, which testing technique is most required, and then you can go on starting to see how to implement it in reality. So and now it comes, because we like a lot normally to automate things when we work in IT. And normally I really put this trade-off personally to say, is it really important to automate or not this API test? So for me, I summarize that as evaluating the cost per use, in fact, of your automated API test. And you need to balance two things: is the value, in fact, the usage is the value you will get for from the automation, and the cost. And the value, you find multiple things. Who will get value from it? So if it's only yourself from the project time, it's much more different than for an entire development team for the 3 years to come. How many times they will use it? So if it's an API that is released, for example, multiple times per day versus something that changes every 6 months, it's much more different, the effort you will have to put. And then to understand which value you will bring. Is it to increase the confidence? Is it to validate the go-no-go of each release? Is it, for example, to be a go-no-go with a third-party provider? Are you able to run the test in different environments, not only in dev or production? And can you also avoid the manual testing cost? Because sometimes people are running automated tests, but they still say, but I will still do it manually to be sure. No, but if you do it automatically, you don't have to do it manually, automatically. You don't have to do it manually on top. And then the cost, and this is a lot of things that are normally not foreseen well in API or in fact in testing, is the cost of automation. So first you have, is it really feasible to do it, or will I not last days to get some tests to be working? Can I may implement to design it, and how many times it will take me to design? How many times to implement, to document and maintain, to integrate all the testing and the tooling, etc. On that part, and then how I will maintain. So you can counterbalance for sure some of this trade-off by using SaaS solution, by using tools that have native integration with your CI/CD tooling, etc. And you should look for this type of solution, but you need to be really conscious about these potential issues and the cost that comes with automation. And then you have to apply your test automation recipe. So on that, there is a lot of toolings there. For me, the most important part, and Diogo can also share his experience, but for me, the most important part on test automation recipe is to invest a lot in the design part, because everything you do after in terms of test object, test suite, test maintenance, etc., have a lot to do with how will you design your test suite, how you design your test to be quite modular, etc. And here you see an example. So it's a screenshot from Catalan, which is one of the courses we had on a test automation camp. But you see that, for example, we properly did the import of an API from an open API standard contract. So it is used in the implementation of the test. Then you get automatically all the verbs, and you can implement the test with the decoupling of your actions and control and your data. For example, it's one thing we have properly done in the course. And in fact, if you are interested to have a step-by-step test automation recipe with Catalan, we have a full course available on the test automation camp with a video, quiz, step-by-step explanation, much more detail about the theory I was sharing around API and how to do it. And all the course is made with a concrete case study. And the case study is one of a startup that is moving to a scale-up. And you are contributing as an API tester with the CTO, with the development team, with the marketing head, and to show value also of your API and integrate it into your environment. So, and just to share here about Test Automation Camp, it's a test automation platform online for QA professional there. So I will now let a bit Diogo also share on his experience, and we have also at the end one surprise for you for the participant of the meetup. And maybe I could go back there. Yes, Diogo.
So is someone trying to talk?
No, I don't think. No.
Okay, so yeah, great presentation, Antoine. I like your approach because usually we focus a lot, like you say, in actually implementing the implementing test automation, implementing API tests. So you worry about, how am I going to do this post to this endpoint? How do I send in form data? How do I send in a body? How do I test these headers, etc. But those are valuable skills and are skills that everyone needs. And probably should start there, because if you don't have those skills, you won't be able to actually test the API. But also having this more holistic approach, having this big picture about how your system works, what's the value of implementing test A against test B, etc. It's something that people should really focus on. So planning is very important. And I've made a lot of mistakes during my time as a tester. I've gone straight to the code. I've gone straight to Postman to test stuff. But the issue is that at the end of the day, if you haven't accounted for a lot of other stuff, you're like, I mean, not at the end of the day, but when you reach a later stage in your project, you're like, oh, maybe I shouldn't have done this way. This isn't bringing so much value. This is something that I now need to rework, etc. So definitely, this sort of planning really helps. And yeah, well, from my experience, it's very helpful. And just on my last job, we were doing this. Well, I was working in a team that supported multiple teams, so it was an automation team, and supported the teams to do automation for their own projects. And we started just like okay, let's start automating everything. But then we understood that people either didn't quite understand what their systems were doing, they didn't understand the flows, they didn't understand the purpose sometimes as well, they didn't understand which brought more value, what was the value. And so we had to step back a little bit and find ways for people to actually, okay, let's think about how I'm actually going to test this API. And that was a very important step for everyone.
Yeah, and you see, so did you see, or do you see the shift in the ecosystem of doing much more, for example, security tests, etc.? Because I have the feeling a lot of people, like you say, it's about doing a few functional tests on Postman or whatever. But I see really a big shift there. Do you see that also in the...
Yeah, I think there must be that shift because, like you said, now there's a lot of public APIs that just expose every part of your product. So you must guarantee that you're not exposing sensitive data. You must guarantee that people don't have like the wrong access to the wrong resources in your system, etc. And part of those tests can be done from a functional perspective. So you can check things like authorization. If you're logged in with certain permissions, you shouldn't access a certain resource, for instance. But then there's also tools that actually do some pen testing for you automatically, and you can grab its feedback and also send the feedback back to developers. But that's a sensitive field because security is quite complex, and a lot of companies opt to have security teams, and instead of providing security training to the actual development teams, agile teams, etc. Which I think, in my opinion, it's such an important matter that you should have both. You should have a security team, but you should also have training inside the teams so that it doesn't reach the stage where the security team has to deal with like a bunch of problems.
Yeah. Okay. So thanks for sharing. So yeah. Well, yeah. Well, feel free to you can put your question in the chat if you have, or if you want to take your microphone and put your camera. We'll be happy to answer questions.
Yeah, and meanwhile, well, if anyone wants to interrupt, please do. I was just going to say, you also spoke about contract testing. That's also a very important thing I've come to learn, because sometimes you might think, okay, my API, it's working. I mean, the unit tests are passing, the integration tests are passing, etc. But if you break contract with your clients, then your API is not working at all, because they all will run into errors and you will not be delivering value as well. So contract testing, it's a subject that sometimes it's hard to deal with. But for instance, with open API specs, there are now a lot of tools that actually just use those open API specs, and they check your responses as you are doing your functional tests, and they tell you this field is missing, or your contract isn't actually your response isn't abiding by this contract because you have a nullable here which shouldn't be a nullable, things like that. So that's something I would also advise people to explore. I've been doing a lot of testing using open API specs, and they're not just for that. You can validate contracts. In one of my projects, I also implemented sort of a coverage approach. So you have if you have your spec and you need to test all the endpoints, you can then check, have I tested all the endpoints or not? So you can automate those checks as well. You can check for documentation inconsistencies, etc. You can even automatically generate your SDK. So there's a lot of stuff you can do with that.
Yeah.
Really cool stuff.
It's quite more new, because a lot of people were doing REST API standard, I would say, with nothing, and now we have much more this type of contract with more opening of the IT system and interconnectivity.
Yeah, and lots of tools that support that.
Yeah.
Arian is asking what kind of methods we should follow for reliable API testing.
So reliable, for me, depends what you put behind reliable. Is it, I would say, maintainable over time? Is it API testing that is not flaky, or because I think there is various possibility there. I think for me, if you are talking about maintainability, follow the recipe we were sharing to put the effort on the right place with minimal test automation that provides the maximum value. Then if you want for me more on the, I would say, reliability in terms of have a low or zero flockiness ratio ideally. So normally you apply the best practice of test design. You decouple your test action from your test data to be independent from the environment. You also integrate all the API in CI/CD with automated feedback loop for the team so that if there is any issue or flocky test, the team is directly correcting it. It does not stay there for 1 day or more, and after it's too late or too costly to update. Yeah. So for me, I think the most two imperative are this one is about reliability, so maintainability and stability. But if you have something else in mind, just feel free to explicit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is quite a broad question, but yeah, I think you need to do like all kinds of tests depending on your objectives. So if you want a performant API, you should probably focus a lot on performance tests. If you want an API that is functionally perfect, but performance isn't so important, then invest more time in functional tests. I think it depends a lot on the goal of your API, like Antoine said during the presentation.
Thanks for the question, Ryan. Okay, but I will move just for the small surprise we have, and feel free if you have any questions in the meanwhile. So today on Test Automation Camp, so we provide e-learning courses. So it's a lot on low code. So with Catalan, it's a multimedia e-learning platform. You have video, quiz, etc., based on real case study. And in the same mindset of today, it's not like all the training you can find on Udemy that show tools. It's about being able to implement API testing in a real context of a company. So, and this is what we provide in the course. So you have all the material to use Catalan and implement all the tests by yourself and automate them properly. But you have also all the background and the methodology to think outside the box and not be only doing test automation without the big picture. No? It has been made by a team of professionals. We have special reviews, so it's people that Diogo knows. So Joel and Ricardo were special reviewer of the course to ensure the quality. We have some reviews also there. And just to share with you, we have a special price that you can have until 10th of February. So you have individual course at 14 euros. So if you are interested mainly in the API tests, you can get it for that price on the website, but you can feel free to get more. And if you get the full bundle on the full course, we have also a specific price on the 45 euro for the full course. So Carolina will put the link. I think maybe it's already done. But, yeah, and feel free there to share. And also, if you are interested to work in QA, we have also openings for Attel.io, which is the collaborating company on Test Automation Camp. So feel free to reach out. And thanks for your time. And if you have any feedback on the meetup, feel free to reach to me or Carolina. And if you want also an idea of topic for the next one, we are happy to produce a meetup. Thanks a lot also to everyone and to Diogo to have come today.
No problem. I'm glad to be here.
Thanks a lot. So see you. Stay well. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.